We're here today with Ashley Baker. Ashley is a professional coach. She's CoActive Training Institute trained with a background as a celebrated educator. She holds a master's in educational leadership from Columbia University and built and implemented innovative curricula for top high schools affiliated with premier universities. She incorporates neurocoaching and neurofeedback into her private coaching practice, and she's also the co-founder of the Women's Collective, which is a hub for high energy, high impact women who are challenging the status quo by taking radical responsibility for their own happiness and well-being. Ashley is a take charge mama bear. I think that's perhaps the most apt description and one that I love the most. So welcome, Ashley.
Thank you so much.
Yes. It's just a gorgeous picture that you're presenting today. Beautiful smile and a gorgeous backdrop behind you. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. I'm feeling very, very happy to be here with you.
Wonderful. So Ashley, you have an amazing background and experience as an educator, as an administrator in schools, and this really unique background that includes neurofeedback and neurocoaching, neurolinguistic programming. Can you tell us a little bit about what led you to coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. So in some way, I think I've always been a coach, starting from the time I was, 18 years old and being a camp counselor, teaching cheerleading, coaching this, that, and the other thing. And my work as an educator, working with high school students and then later young adults, 18 to 24, was also really coaching work, in that it was less about the content that I was teaching and more about supporting people in developing the skills to pursue their own interests and their own wants. And so it was a very natural progression for me to go from the world of education, working in public high schools, and then into training young adults for corporate America, into the work that I'm doing now as a coach. And the way that I got into it personally, like I didn't really even know that coaching was a thing. And the
A lot
way,
of people don't.
yeah, the way I came to it was I was in a really difficult time personally when my son was 18 months old. My marriage ended and very abruptly, and I had spent a lot of time in therapy processing that for basically
Mm.
2 years. And then a dear friend of mine who had been a therapist and then went into coaching, she was trained through CTI. She said to me, "Have you considered coaching?" And I didn't really understand what that meant. And I was, doing great in my career and loved what I was doing. And I was like, I don't think I need coaching, because I had thought that it was really just about supporting people and figuring out their career paths. And then she explained to me more of what coaching is, in that it's really about looking at where are you now and where do you want to go. Whereas for me, therapy has more been a way of looking to the past and saying like, okay, how did I get to where I am? And then I started to work with her one-on-one doing coaching. And the amount of progress that I was able to make in 6 months compared to the 2 years of thaeraPy was huge. And I think therapy is wonderful and it's really good for different things.
Absolutely.
But I was just so delighted and thankful to have found coaching as a modality, and to see how quickly I was able to iterate on things, not just because of the work that happens in the coaching sessions. The real magic for me was happening between sessions, because it's
Ah.
taking the insights and then looking for very concrete and specific ways to apply those understandings to my life, so that way they were not just concepts or ideas that were living in my head, but I started to live these ideas. And it also gave me a lot of space to sort of experiment and try on different things, and I felt like a lot of growth happened in that space.
Yeah, there's so many pieces of wisdom in that story, and I would just love to unpack a couple of things. And as you mentioned, with initially going to therapy for about 2 years, working to process through the emotions surrounding the end of your marriage and being a single mother, and I've been a single mother myself. I understand how challenging that can be. with a young child. I think that for people to understand that sometimes when you have the opportunity to go through a therapeutic process and then come to coaching, the marriage of the two allows for so much profound growth and change. And I love that you said that coaching really allowed you to have those actionable steps to get what's next, to get to where what to get to what's next rather. And as an educator, when you have the ability to actually apply your learning, that's when you're growing, right? So
Exactly.
yeah, I love how you brought that together. And then being able to try on different modalities and make them your own. I'm really curious at what point you decided to go through coactive training after having that experience yourself. When did you say, "Hey, I need to do this. I need to do more of this"?
Yeah, so after I worked with her, pretty soon into working with her, it was pretty clear that this is something I wanted to pursue. And through my own process, so I was in therapy, and then I was also doing a lot of self learning outside of that process. And so I was learning lots of different modalities for my own healing. And I
Mm,
just love the process of learning. And because my approach to the world has always been sort of like as a life hacker, I'm always trying to figure out how to do life well. Learning these different modalities and figuring out how they work for me, how I would tweak them, what's the best way to support others in making that accessible to them in whatever way works for them is just such a fun process for me. And so because
yeah.
I loved going through the experience of receiving the support of someone who had been through the CoActive training, I was so curious to understand the mechanics of it and what was going on underneath it. And to just get to experience that more fully myself, and then of course to be able to share that with others.
Yeah, that's absolutely beautiful. And I think that when you talked about being able to approach coaching from different angles and understand when you're working with a client, really understand what's working for them and having that experience in education, similar element that you brought into your classroom or into your working with teachers as an administrator, understanding where you can tap into a client to find that approach that's going to allow them to grow. And I think some of the skill set that's involved in there is surrounding deep listening and adaptability. Tell me a little bit what you think the sweet spot is with coaching.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the thing I love about coaching is that it can be so individualized. A lot of my clients say that they feel like the work that I do with them is basically designing a very personalized, individualized curriculum for them. So
Hmm.
the way that the coaching typically works is that a client will show up with their agenda, meaning here's the thing that I want to break through on right now. So just got off a call with a client who needs to fire someone, and she hasn't fired someone. She recently started a company
Tough.
a year ago. She's to do her first firing, um, and so she comes with the agenda, and I have this amazing tool set that I've been working on gathering through all of these different techniques that I have learned. And so my job is to meet her exactly where she is, really listen to her. And I'm listening on multiple levels. So I'm listening to the literal words that she's saying. I'm listening to her body language. I'm listening to the energy. I'm listening for inconsistencies in things that she's saying. I'm also listening for
Mm.
patterns from things that she's saying now to things that she's talked about, you know, months before. And I'm helping connect the lines in different ways as I'm listening. And then in my mind, I get to do the really fun creative work of thinking about, okay, what tool do I think would really serve her best in this moment? And so it's a matter of asking the right questions to bring out whatever it is that is going to help her get closest to her truth in this matter.
Mm.
What's so difficult here for her? And then unpacking that, and then providing the scaffolding of, okay, here's a tool that you could use, and then supporting her in learning how to really implement that. So that way it's not a tool that she's getting just from me, right? The idea is when you do this coaching, you have this tool and you get to take it with you and you have it for the rest of your life. And so
Right.
the amazing thing is it actually doesn't even matter too much what the content is that the client brings to the conversation. We use that more as a vehicle for getting into whatever the underlying issues are. And what's amazing is that the underlying issues are almost the same across the board. So for
Mm-hmm.
instance, last week I was working with a client who was talking about how it's really difficult that her employees are not following through on expectations. And when we unpacked it, we got to the bottom of the fact that she's been really uncomfortable stating what her expectations are. And
Ah.
almost in the same breath, she's saying, oh, and it's the same issue I have with my mother, my husband, and my children, right? And so we start to recognize, the issue here is learning how to state what are my expectations, what are my needs, and communicating them clearly. And so it didn't matter if that day we happened to have been talking about a frustration she had with her mother or a frustration she had with her employee, because it's the same issue underneath. And the work that we do is really about connecting those underlying lines.
Ashley, I think that's absolutely brilliant. And I think for the benefit of the viewers, something that we can unpack a little bit more is that idea of topic as vehicle for getting to the
Mhm.
underlying pattern. So when a client comes to a coaching session, they are usually asked to come with a topic for the coaching for that particular week or session. And um, from someone who's had coaching before, I can recall quite vividly when I went into a session and said to myself, "Oh, this is definitely one I want to tackle in today's session, and these are the outcomes that I'd like to see as a result, or the skills I want to work on." And because of the mastery of the coach, because of that deep curiosity and listening and being able to thread the pattern together and to also reflect back what I'm saying so I can hear myself, you wind up going in a completely different direction, but it's all linked, right? And it's absolutely fascinating when that happens.
Such interesting creatures. It's just,
Yeah.
it's so interesting.
Yeah. And I think if we could also talk a little bit about that concept of there being a pattern to the issues that we're bringing up or the language that we're using. In your tool set, I know you have NLP and you have neurofeedback, and there's some deep connection between language and how we conceptualize of things. Can you talk a little bit more about that and maybe break it down for the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of what I do is support people in understanding how we are impacted by our own language, the words that we use to describe things. So recognizing that language is really, language is symbols. And
Mm-hmm.
symbols can hold a lot of meaning and a lot of weight. And by being more precise with our language, it helps us get more clear on what we want. So, for instance, yesterday I was working with a client who we came to a distinction between the difference between options and possibilities.
Ah.
And it seems so subtle, right? You
Yeah,
have two options, you have two possibilities, but the two hold really different energies to them because we have different
absolutely.
associations with what those words mean. And it was really illuminating to recognize how swapping out options for possibilities changed the experience in his body of what he was confronted with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's connected to a lot of the work that I do is embodiment work. So oftentimes we get really stuck in our heads, right? We overthink. Sometimes I think I'm just like this brain that's walking around. I forget that I'm a body. And when I reconnect with my body, I find that there is so much wisdom there. And
Mhm.
I have been doing a lot of work to retrain myself to listen to my body, and to use anchorings, which is a tool to connect with certain physical energies to basically create shortcuts in our brains to get us into a different state of being, such that
Yeah.
whatever it is that we want to do becomes easier. So I'll reveal this right now. So really right before we got on our call, I did this. This is an anchoring that I use to make sure that I'm getting into a state where I'm just an open vessel and I'm receiving and I'm connected to my source of power.
Mhm.
And doing that somehow does something in my brain that gets me to feel more confident, more poised, and simply more connected with myself. I can't
Mhm.
do that by telling myself, oh, be poised, be confident. I can't think myself into that state. But it's almost like magic. I do this and I get there. And
Yeah.
so it's a lot about sort of learning the ways that our brains work and our bodies work and how to work well with them together to achieve what we want, to get the desired states that we want, and to pursue the goals and interests and desired feelings that we have.
I love the point that you bring up about the importance of being embodied. And in fact, we're human beings, not human doings. Oftentimes we use our bodies as instruments of action rather than the place where we reside and where we can be integrated. And by connecting the mind and the body, you can really tap into different wisdom, right? And you can change your predisposition, you can change your mindset, you can settle yourself, you can physiologically calm your nervous system. So I think you raise a very important point, and definitely one that I would encourage people to learn more about. um, so in talking about language and in talking about embodiment, the somatic experience, you've been doing some amazing work with leading women's empowerment cohorts through the Women's Collective. And I would love to learn more. Can you tell us a bit more about that? And what do you see in a group environment that you're not able to see one-on-one necessarily?
Yeah, so the group programs are so wonderful because I find that what happens is that we sort of expose our humanity, right? It's again this
Okay.
whole thing of like getting stuck in our heads and thinking that we're the only ones dealing with this stuff. And by creating an environment that's really safe where people can be genuinely vulnerable, and it's interesting, it takes a real level of vulnerability to state what you actually want, right? I think we're often so
Yeah.
conditioned to say like, oh, I shouldn't be so presumptuous to think that I can get that. But to be in a space where you're encouraged to say like, yeah, you can do that, right? And to then also be in a safe space to be able to say, here are all the self doubts that I have. Here's the negative self talk that's running through my head. Here are the excuses that I always come up against. It seems like I never have enough time, or there's always something that's happening with my kids, or there's always more work to do, whatever it is, right? We all have our default excuses, and being
Hmm.
able to surface those in a safe space to name them and then be with a group of women who are there leading with love and saying, I know what you want and I believe you can have it. And so I'm going to call you out on that stuff.
Yeah.
It, it's incredible what can happen in that space. Right now, we're running these accountability programs, and so what that looks like is 6 weeks. We spend 2 weeks doing goal setting, and the goal setting is not just identifying what your goal is, but it's really around identifying the state of being that you want to be in, and then
Hmm.
developing goals around that. So it's a really deep self-reflective process that we lead you through for 2 weeks. And then it's 4 weeks of sprinting towards a particular goal. So right now in a current cohort, I have one woman who's launching a clothing line, one woman who's building out her portfolio as a user design expert, one woman who's purchasing her first real estate property, and another who is launching her new website. And so in this space, every single day, they're working towards these goals and reporting back to the group each day to say, have I done the things that I said I was going to do? And it's not just, working on my social media campaign. It's also the sort of habits that get us into the place of being the type of person we want to be. So we work with alter
Right.
egos. We identify the sort of edgy way of being, the way you want to live into being. And then we do activities. So for instance, one woman is learning to be more creative and flexible. And so her alter ego is Jackson Pollock. And so
Okay.
for 20 minutes, she's painting,
Hmm.
she's throwing paint around, and she's
Oh.
trusting that process. And she's noticing how that impacts her work.
Hmm.
Right? So it's, instead of just being super linear and saying, okay, this is my checklist, these are the things I'm going to do, it's really about expanding into a new way of being. And so every day she's checking in and she's reporting, how is she feeling? What is she thinking about? What is she noticing about the impact on her work? And then if there's any day that a woman doesn't do the things that she says she's going to do, the whole team hops on a call and we start troubleshooting, and
Oh,
we try to
wow.
understand what's happening underneath, right? What stood between you and 20 minutes of painting today? Oh, I
Hmm.
overslept. Well, okay, well, why did you oversleep? And then, oh, because I was up late doing such and such. Okay, well, what boundaries do you need to put in place? And so it really is about developing this comprehensive approach to understanding what have been the blocks that have stopped us. And we deal, again, it's like we use the topic as a vehicle. So does anyone care that much if she does her 20 minutes of painting each day? It's not about that. It's about supporting you in the process and using that as a vehicle for understanding what are the blocks that come up, and how do you make
Hmm.
sure that you have measures in place to support yourself and really being able to advance and move forward in the ways you want.
Yeah, I think that's just absolutely incredible. There's many, many things that I love about that model, but I think just to sort of recap the main themes, there's this idea of being in such a supportive, loving environment that you can be fully vulnerable. You can share with people, this is what my self-critic says to me, and this is the reason, no, actually the excuse that I give myself every day for not making progress towards this goal. And also this idea that you can come together in a community to troubleshoot and support, and that there is that peer accountability built into this women's empowerment accountability program. So being able to, in a very focused, time delineated way, creating some urgency and some momentum, propel women towards where they want to go, who they want to be, how they want to live. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
That's
You captured it
incredible.
beautifully. Yeah. And it's, again, it's all about working with the way that our brains and our bodies work. And for some reason, we're wired for that sort of social connectivity. It's really hard to make progress in isolation, but when
Hmm.
there's a social accountability piece there, it happens, and it's magical, but it works.
Yeah, and it's so fun that you raised that. I think for the benefit of the listeners as well, if you think about humans, we are social creatures. We have developed to live in tribes, to live in families, to support one another, and that is built into our psychology and built into our physiology. So there is power in groups. And even when those groups are happening online, it's still a very wonderful experience where there is human connection. So Thanks
Yeah.
for
I've
bringing more of
been
that into the world.
pleasantly surprised by how well this work has translated into a virtual space.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Ashley, can you tell us a little bit more about what's next for the Women's Collective? So, what other types of groups of women do you aspire to bring together, and where would you like to take this next?
Yeah. So the Women's Collective is mostly working with women entrepreneurs. And so we are really interested in working with women who are basically across the spectrum. But the next thing that we'll be launching is a cohort program where we will be working with women to move from the idea conception all the way into the actual formation of their businesses. And so that will
Ah,
be a year-long program. And that will be, it will have the accountability piece worked into it. And they'll be working with different coaches to really support them in the different elements of what it takes to start a business. And so for that, we're really excited about working with women who are coming right out of college. And then also women, I'm currently working with women in their 60s who have sort of come to the end of one career and are ready to start their next careers. And that's also a really exciting place to be. And so, the full spectrum, and it's absolutely inspiring to see the commonality and also the collective wisdom that comes about from sharing different experiences from different life experiences. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think that's absolutely extraordinary, and I love how it's kind of bookended as well, these two client niches. So, looking at women recently graduated from college who aspire to build their own business empire, and then also looking at women in their 60s who may have had a very successful first career and supporting them as they transition into what's next.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
everything in between too, right? So also working with
yeah,
lots of young women, moms, um, women who are in their 30s and pursuing also their next careers. We're living during a time when people have many, many different careers. And so it's a really exciting space to be in as women are reinventing themselves and figuring out what really matters most to them and how to make that live and breathe in the world.
yeah. I love that. Making it live and breathe in the world. Yes, please. I'm wondering if you could tell us more about what you see in as issues for women in entrepreneurship. So, for me, as an example, I'm a startup founder. I've been in the startup ecosystem for about a year and a half now, and I notice major differences between that and academic medicine and higher education. But what would you say energetically you notice? Is the startup community, entrepreneur community, a bit more of a masculine energy, whereas women are not encouraged to lead in the same way as perhaps would feel more natural? What do you observe?
Yeah, so I definitely notice that there are certain energies that people bring to business. And what I'm seeing again and again is that the women who are moving into entrepreneurship have gotten to where they've been by being a certain way, by being a good girl, doing the
Hmm.
right thing, doing what other people have told them to do. And so they are really successful in doing that. um, Starting your own business is a really different thing, right? You can follow somebody else's model, but it's really hard to feel good in that when you're not connected to your own autonomy and your own truth. And so a
Mm,
lot of the work that we're doing is sort of peeling that stuff back and recognizing that what got you to where you are, your current level of success, is not going to take you to the next level of success that you want, because it's a different thing. I find that a lot of women, regardless of age, as they're moving into entrepreneurship, they're sort of on the cusp of good girl, strong woman.
ah.
I'm ready to be strong and independent and sovereign. And it feels really scary. It feels scary to say, here's what I want, to say, I believe I'm entitled to what I want, to
Mhm.
pursue our pleasure instead of pursuing what we think other people should want us to do. And
Yeah.
so, and again, while we might get all of it intellectually, it's a whole other thing to move into embodying that and to own it and to say, okay, I can live this as my reality. And a lot of it really starts with supporting women in identifying what they want. A lot of women don't even know, right?
Yeah.
A lot of stuff has been put on them, and um, it's a process to learn how to really reconnect with yourself and say, what's important to me, what gives me pleasure, and then to give yourself permission to pursue that.
Wonderful. Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom right there. And coming from a female founder, I can completely relate to that. It's quite interesting how often in pursuing your own goals and doing well in your own career, you can build yourself around serving others and putting their needs first. And if you're counting yourself as successful if you're able to help them advance or help the company advance rather than the onus on you and wanting that kind of recognition and that position of power. But putting your finger on the pulse of women entrepreneurs everywhere and being able to say, hey, what is it that you're wanting? What do you need? What's your vision? Step into that, I think is extraordinary. And to have a group of women around you supporting you in that is even more extraordinary.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah,
To me, it makes it all feel possible.
absolutely.
Sisterhood.
Yeah. Well, maybe just one last question as we wind down. And I think it's a beautiful segue from where we were just standing. But Ashley, if you had a billboard to put up to give a piece of advice to women entrepreneurs everywhere, the clients that you seek to serve, what would it say?
Such a good question. I had three pop into my head all at once.
Well, we can make it a road, like those
Okay.
when you're approaching a town, they really want you to stop
Yeah,
at the
there
gift
we go.
shop. There's three in a row, so let's take that.
So, number one, trust yourself.
Yeah.
Number two, pursue your pleasure. And I just lost what number three is. Mm, shoot.
In my head, I'm making up it has to do with something like stepping into your power, but that's maybe just where I'm going.
No, it's something around the radical responsibility,
Oh,
right?
yes.
It's and maybe it is about your power. It's like your power rests in radical responsibility.
Yes. Would it be your power rests in radical responsibility?
Oh, but this is the third one I was actually thinking of.
Okay.
Let it be easy. And it's such an interesting dichotomy because
Oh,
like taking radical responsibility sounds like not letting it be easy, but the two of them together is such an extraordinary marriage.
you're going to have to tell us more about that. We were winding down, but now you're
No,
going to have to
it's,
explain that a bit more.
it's a beautiful dichotomy. So radical responsibility doesn't mean I have to do everything myself. It's much more about integrity, right? It's taking ownership for who I am in the matter of this, and really owning your own emotional well-being and also letting others own theirs. And in
Yeah.
doing that, you get into alignment with yourself. And once you're in alignment with yourself, things become easier. And so it's really about releasing this idea of like, oh, I have to work hard in order to be successful. It needs to be difficult in order for it to be good. And instead, let it be easy and take radical responsibility
Mm.
gets you there. Taking radical responsibility gets you to the point of letting it be easy.
That
Okay.
is brilliant.
So it's three. It is three. It's take radical responsibility and let it be easy. Trust yourself and pursue your pleasure.
Yes.
Yeah. Boom, boom, boom.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Ashley. This has been just an incredible conversation and lots of incredible learning for people who are tuning in.
Thank you. You are
Yeah,
such an amazing listener, and you're so good at picking up the themes and the threads and bringing it all together in a really coherent way. And I love the work that you're doing. Thanks so much for making this type of work accessible to more people, because this modality is so awesome and profound, and not enough people know about it. So the work that you're doing is so very needed. Thank you.
thank you, Ashley. It's my pleasure to bring this to more people in the world. I think we all need it. So thank you for the work you're doing. It's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Be well.